morning, good night, but we're so glad everyone could join us today. Before we start, acknowledgement, I'd like to give acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to the elders both past and present. I would like also to extend acknowledgement of country to all First Nations people around the world and acknowledgement to all people living with dementia and those that provide support, care and love. So who's with us today? So today's conversation, we've got joining us Nicole Smith, who's the Chief Operations Officer at Community Home Australia in Canberra. She's also the brains trust behind kicking off Open the Doors and one of the official absolute co-founders. Lisa Rogers-Owen, a freelance dementia educator at Dementia Hub New Zealand and co-founder of Open the Doors. Gwenda Darling, an ageing troublemaker. Dr. Nathalie Huitema, oh God, now I've completely stuffed that up. And I had it written down, so my apologies, Natalie. I'm just going to say Nathalie.
Huitema.
Who's a gynecologist and sexologist. Theresa Flavin, vocal advocate of true, genuine and equitable inclusion of people living with dementia and all aspects of life. And Sharon Alles, senior age service navigator and advocate at Meridian, Canberra's LGBTIQA+ community organisation. And Sharon's going to talk a little bit more about that plus as well when she speaks. So now I'd like to hand over to Lisa and she will pick things up from here.
Okay, good morning, good evening, whichever time zone you're in. Just want to talk about what Keys to the Door is. So Keys to the Door is a monthly online panel discussion, and the aim is to come together and contribute to thought-provoking discussions, innovative thoughts, ideas, successes and lessons learned. They're central to making change in the lives of our elders, loved ones, older adults. And the Keys to the Door sessions are part of supporting our mission to open the doors by 2030. Tonight, our session is, I'm very excited about. It's a topic that I've done a lot of work in and I'm very passionate about and really keen to listen to the speakers. Is about when yes means yes, and it's an open talk about sexuality and ageing. We've got some wonderful panelists and we really welcome discussions and feedback and conversations in this space. So what we'd really like you to do is keep your cameras on if you can. We like to see people and we like to engage, and we'll also be recording the session and then we'll share the discussion in a newsletter. Utilise the chat function to ask questions and somebody will monitor those questions, so hopefully we can get them answered and we can have a discussion. But what we'd ask is we'd really like to open up questions after the guest panels have spoken. So hold those thoughts but keep putting them in the chat and then we can answer them at the end and have a discussion afterwards. So I'm going to hand back over to Nicole to talk about what we're going to discuss today.
Thank you, Lisa. And we're going to play a quick video before I do my introductions again and hear all of the wonderful guest speakers. So today we are talking about sex. Press the button. Oh, there's no sound. There was a song. I'm not going to sing it.
Sing, Nicole, sing.
Talk about sex.
Wait, I'll play it again.
No.
I can hear it in my head anyway. Aw. Well, it's on LinkedIn. You can press the button and it sings Let's Talk About Sex, Baby. And if anyone wants to sing it, please jump in, but I'm not going to do that today. So welcome again to this amazing discussion that I've been desperate to be part of. We've got Dr. Nathalie, Theresa and Gwenda and Sharon speaking each for 5 minutes at a time, and then we will open up the conversation to the wider audience. And when we do open that conversation, it's going to be 2 questions. When does yes mean yes? And when does no mean no? But anything that comes up in between, please put it in the chat. Please ask all of the hard questions. Tell us if you don't like talking about sex. I mean, there's a lot of biasms around sex in aging, and people all interpret how they feel about it differently, and that often gets pushed onto our older Australians across the board, with or without dementia, wherever they live. So here today is to unpack what hasn't been said, lack of research, what you want to know more about, and I'm really excited to hear each speaker. So first of all, we'll have Dr. Nathalie speaking, and then we will pass over to Theresa. So take it away, Nathalie. We'd love to hear what you've got to say, what you're contributing to sexuality and ageing, and what are your thoughts on the topic.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I saw the picture and I look so serious, and Gwenda looks like she has way more fun than I do. So
That's not true.
So, I did my research on sexual consent in older adults with cognitive impairments, and I've published about it. I will send the links to Nicole so she can put it in the newsletter for you all to see. And I also published and did some research, but that's not published yet, on sex work in aged care. But for this talk, or discussion, I'm gonna focus on sexual consent. So when I talk about sexuality, sexual consent, and older adults with cognitive impairment, I first want to make clear what my definition of sexuality is, or how I view sexuality, what my framework is. And I consider sexuality to be on a continuum. So it doesn't mean it has to be like intercourse or whatever you do. It can also be like cuddling, kissing, having a real close friend. So it can be like closeness, intimacy, and all the way to actual sexuality. So that means that sexuality can be a lot of things and not a lot of things at the same time. It depends on the person, depends on the context. But my point is that it's always more than just intercourse or whatever you do. So when it comes to conversations about aging and dementia and sexuality, the focus tends to fall on what's been lost. So cognitive decline, the inability to remember, maybe some not communicating as before. And this stereotypical idea that aging means loss, I would argue that causes like a limited view on sexuality. And this limited view on sexuality, if you look at aged care, becomes more clear, such as reduced privacy with increased care needs, families' preferences override residents' choices. There's hardly any staff training. There's no sexual health guidelines, or hardly. Risk avoidance is prioritized, and rooms can be too small to accommodate an extra bed or an extra person who wants to spend the night. And a lot of the care facilities are structured more for care rather than a home-like atmosphere. And I can go on and on and on about this, but I will leave it at this. Another limitation is the fact that sexual consent is mostly considered to be a binary decision. So meaning that older adults are considered to be able to consent or not consent. And usually when an older adult has cognitive impairment, it is very likely that they are considered to be unable to consent, purely based on the diagnosis. And if you look at our current healthcare, it's very much set up, or for the most part set up. Luckily, there's some movement, especially with Open the Doors, etc. But a lot of it is still set up based on the conventional caregiver, care recipient model, which means that older adults are generally considered to be frail or dependent, and need of protection. And while these that model and the limitation that I mentioned are they are real, of course, but the other side is that usually goes unnoticed is what still remains. So this is where what it's called the salutogenic approach comes into play, and that approach encourages us to rethink how we view older adults, dementia, and sexual consent, because in essence it focuses towards factors that support health and well-being, and it emphasizes potential and resilience and strength and all the things that are still there. So my point is that we need to focus on not only on the potential and the strength and the resilience and the things that are still there, that are still healthy, that are still working, that make them like the person that they are. But we also need to support the residents' rights and address his, her, or their needs, not focus on how we can control the behavior that we see, but see them as a person. And in addition to that, I would like to argue that our focus should not only be whether a resident can say no, which is usually the question when we talk about sexual consent, but whether we accept and allow them to say yes. That's all for now.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for that. I know it's a very quick summary, but we will open up the floor more and take questions. But you are so right. And watching friendships and sexuality grow, and I don't mean sex by sexuality either, Nathalie, is one of the loveliest joys I see in Community Home Australia, that permission to connect and touch and bond during that very difficult process of, you know, having dementia and being admitted to a new service, watching people hold hands suddenly, that are married and not tearing them apart in that old reactive framework I used to work in is just an absolute joy. And I love that you really do bring that point home, that it's not just about, you know, sex as in the actual deed of having sex. It's so much more. Sometimes it's the way you wear your lipstick, the way you wear your hair. So much more to unpack there. Theresa, it's your 5 minutes to talk about what you're working on, what you're contributing to, and what are your views about sexuality and aging, and you can answer that in any form that you wish. So over to Theresa.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I live with younger onset dementia, and a lot of my work sits around the human rights and supported decision-making space. And before I get into I guess what we might laugh and call the down and dirty, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of dementia itself from my perspective, because the outside world often sees us as an empty shell and the inner self disappearing as people on the outside would have known it. And my experience is actually the opposite, that instead of fading away into nothing, I'm actually blending into everything. And my perception and awareness is so much enhanced. I have hyper awareness of what's happening in a room, hyper awareness of how people are behaving and their attitudes and things like that. So when you're looking towards people being responsive, we're so super responsive, and I would liken it very, very much. And the experience is very closely related to neurodivergence and non-speaking autism. So if you were to look at the experience, that's how it feels inside. The disconnect is while inside we are pretty much intact, we don't often have a pathway to communicate that in the way that you would like, or that in a way that you would understand. So in terms of consent is the number one thing for me. Sexual activity, as it stands, there are huge risks to sexual activity for older people in terms of osteoporosis, skin tears, all of those things that we need support with. So let's say we've changed the paradigm and sexual expression and intimacy is okay. Let's jump into the future and we're living in that situation. What we actually need is support to do it safely and well and in some level of comfort and without shame. So I put that forward first, that really helping to educate older people that there are ways to express their sexuality that isn't going to hurt the other person or themselves potentially. This is quite apart from the sexual disease transmission and all of that sort of thing, that actual physical aspect of helping people to transition to sexual activity and sexual expression in a way that's not going to give them hip pain or whatever that might look like. Consent is probably really the biggest pain point in this discussion, because we've got fluctuating cognition, or what you see is fluctuating cognition. And we also have the will and preference dichotomy. And will and preference is often, the two words are often run together in the human rights conversations about us, where will and preference just becomes one thing. And it's not. The will represents what you might interpret as pre-dimensionally, all of the values that I've lived my life with. Preference is more around the immediate satisfaction of a need. And those two, when you don't have dementia, there's tension between them and you make your informed consent based on the balance of those two. So when you live with dementia, the will and the preference fluctuate. So on the outside, you're not quite sure, are you listening to the will of the person or are you listening to the preference? And that can be difficult. So consent can be difficult to communicate. A yes can be difficult to communicate and a no can be difficult to communicate. And I don't really think we have an answer for that. So in my view, I would like to have some input into the support that will support me to have sexual intimacy relationships or not. I need support for my yes and I need support for my no. But how is someone who doesn't know me going to give that support? Because you can only base it on what you see. My token of yes will not be the word yes. I've lived with sexual trauma and childhood trauma. So I actually don't know how someone outside of me would ever interpret my shy little as a yes, when that's actually a trauma response. That's me just going back to what happened in my childhood life, keeping myself safe. So the only way I could come to terms with this was to actually give my care providers the information that you need to help me make these choices and to help the partner make these choices and to respect my human rights and their human rights by way of an advance social directive, some way of communicating my personal preference. Now, I can talk about my individual preference for no sexual contact, unless it's extremely clear that I'm saying an absolute active and joyful yes. Now, that's probably unlikely to be the case, but you guys have nothing to support you in that. How do you have my back to support my human right to say no when I can't express it? And equally, if it was a hard yes, you've got nothing to support this decision either. I want to give you that information, and I'm looking for pathways where I can make an advanced sexual directive. I want to make that advanced sexual directive not on entry to residential aged care with my partner and my adult children sitting beside me. I don't want them to be part of the discussion. I don't want my adult children to have any knowledge of the trauma that I've lived with as a child. These things are private. These things need a lot of support. So I'm looking to open the discussion in a way that leaves room for everybody, whether you're a hard no or an absolute joyful yes. We need to make room for all of that. And if we're in a situation where there is not an intimate partner long-term, where it's resident on resident, or whether it's a lonely resident that needs an outside service, please, for goodness sake, do a sexual health policy to help us to do this safely and well. Consent is consent, but you guys can go a long way in acting before the person is in that phase of dementia where you really can't rely on what is said. And that can be because of dementia, or it can be because of the presence and the pressures of other people, particularly for those of us who, I was born into a faith-based institution in Ireland. I would be extremely uncomfortable. My body will respond if I find myself in a faith-based institution again. There is no way I would say hard yes when I knew that there was a saint on the front of the institution. And I'm casting no aspersions here. I'm just giving this from my very personal experience. So what I'm asking for is to open the doors to give us a voice in this. We have no voice that can be relied on. We have no way to support you to support us. And I'm asking you to be thought leaders in this space to really make room for us into the future. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Theresa. Very powerful words there and so much food for thought. I was collecting your words, as you were speaking, because there's so much to unpack there. Advanced sexual directives, like amazing, like advocating and having a supportive pathway as you go through, different stages of your journey. You're absolutely right. There's so many people that have been part of the National Redress Scheme right now across Australia and around the world that have been given money by the institutions for childhood sexual survivors. We're going to see that more and more in their ageing journey in the form of younger onset dementia. There's a lot more research that's going to come out about childhood trauma, sexual abuse and dementia. So I'm so glad you brought this up. It's so very important that we learn to read the signs and the signs of people who have suffered at the hands of perpetrators, because the yes and no's will look very different. I'm mind blown. Thank you so much. I can't wait to open it up to the floor and see what everybody else is thinking at the end of this chat. But we're going to get our legendary troublemaker up on the screen now. So that's Gwenda Darling, and we're going to hear what she's been working on, how she feels about sexuality and aging, and what she wants to tell us today when she's not on mute.
It's always one that does that, isn't it? How can I follow the beautiful Theresa? I'm so proud to call her one of my closest friends. The amazing woman. And Theresa and I have lived, no two trauma survivors have lived the same life, but sometimes our paths have followed similar paths. And Theresa's responses are very different to mine, which says how we all are travelling our own journey. Theresa and I were diagnosed at similar times. I'll be 13 years in January. I think she's already 13 years post-diagnosis. But I was listening and I was thinking, crikey, all I want to do is be loved. All I want is someone to love me. All I want is someone to just hold me in a meaningful way. Listening to Nathalie, is that sex? Is that intimacy? Or is it just meeting the need as a basic need, like hunger, thirst, shelter? Sex is a basic need. So why have we allowed society to make it dirty? Why have we tainted it? It's a basic human need. Why can't I say, God, I'm horny? Why can't we do that? Why can't we talk about those jolly sex toys, those Bluetooth sheaths that you can put on, that you can control, and you can help that person who may be a paraplegic to actually reach an orgasm? Why can't we do that in residential care? Why can't we have male sex workers in sexual care, in residential care? Why can't we, instead of saying you can't? Dementia itself, said it before, either makes you hypersexual or asexual. There seems to be no middle ground. I haven't found it yet. It swings and roundabouts. And who knows how you're going to wake up today? So who knows what the consent or what the answer would be today? hang on, who knows what it will be in a minute's time? It's so very different. And this is where what Theresa was saying about the will and preference, it changes. Just like my taste changes. You might acknowledge, I don't want chocolate today and that I'm on a savoury day. Why can't I be on a savoury day in my sexual and intimacy rights? Why can't I be on a chocolate sweet day? Nothing's lineal. And I don't know how we can get this message across. Nothing in our lives stay the same. Particularly living with dementia with me, I'm all over the shop. And I just really think that, how are we going to get that message across? I did some residential aged care facility visits last week with the department, and I was so absolutely elated. I mean, I went into the terrible one, I went into a good one. I actually found another one that I would go into. So I found 2 in Australia that I would go into. I found 2 residential aged care communities. Isn't that good that I don't have to do voluntary assisted dying next week because I found 2? But these were official visits, and one of the lifestyle coordinators said something to me. She took me aside and said, I got some condoms for some people. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. Where are they? On the bowl on the sideboard. And the regional manager happened to turn up at that stage. She said, we wouldn't put them out there. They'd be eating them like lollies. And I said, oh, well, once they opened them, they'd soon realise they're not lollies. They might make water balloons out of them, but I don't think they'd quite use them like lollies. And, the men are so thrilled. Now, that's interesting because I would have thought in my naivety that it would be women who wanted to stay safe. It would be, but the men, particularly those who are in same-sex relationships, are really wanting condoms. Maybe they're not using PrEP, but they really, really are wanting condoms. So if we are not talking about heterosexual sex, which is the assumption of what everybody's doing in residential care, why haven't we got a duty of care to protect those in same-sex relations? Surely we have a responsibility. And yet it's interesting, I spoke to ACON, and they're basically not giving out condoms anymore. I said to them, can we get some in? But I have to tell you, I'll have to lighten this conversation a bit. I went to a conference and there were all these little packets saying ageing fabulously. And so I picked up lots of them thinking they were packets of condoms, and I got home, they were bloody tea bags. But never mind. I really think that we are moving the narrative in the bowels of Parliament, so to speak. I'm meeting with the Minister again tomorrow, and she's talking about it. She's talking about intimacy in residential aged care. She's talking about our rights to intimacy, and that's what it is. We know the benefits. It lowers our blood pressure. God, look how much they could save on beta blockers if they gave us more sex. Maybe they could then pay for sex workers, because a male sex worker is 4 times the cost of a female. So we look at, the breakdown in communication and the emotional distance that happens between partners when we may have a loved one in residential care. And how do we break that down? How often do you hear, I go and visit, but he doesn't know what I'm talking about? Why do you have to verbally talk? Why can't we touch, taste, feel, just hold? Some people just want some skin-to-skin contact. You don't have to do the deed. And I really think that what we've got to do is we have to destigmatise, demystify, and almost cleanse the attitude of society towards sex. I'll shut up now.
Never shut up, Gwenda. I love hearing everything you've got to say. And don't worry, male sex robots are coming out soon, so you won't have to pay 4 times the price. They estimate by 2030, all the men are in trouble because there'll be Jude Law's coming to life, if you remember that movie.
We'll be able to get them under the inclusions and exclusions in the supported home.
The consumables, yep, on the NDIS.
No, aged care we're talking, we don't get consumables, we get inclusions and exclusions.
But you're so right, Gwenda, we need to protect our, LGBTQI people in aged care homes. We need to put condoms in bowls. They're not going to chew them because they're very chewy. They'll be chewing for a while. And that's such a stigma that people would eat a condom. I mean, this is the biasm that is aged care. Loving everything you had to say, which leads so well into Sharon from Meridian, who works in this space, who does hand out those condoms for older people and talks about sexual health. So Sharon, tell us what you're working on, tell us your thoughts and tell us what you're doing.
Well, gosh, after all those speakers, how fabulous to listen to all that. And I agree with everything everyone's been saying. And we do have condoms. I don't know if you can see, we've got these little condom packets here in larger font, all accessible, 2 packets of lube, 1 condom. We can suffer the dry old vaginas. And before I start, I must say hello to my colleague. I know it's been recorded. My colleague, Carla, I work with, this is her topic. She just loves talking about sex. She couldn't be with us today. She's with the grandies down the coast. So I'm going to try and be as enthusiastic as she is. We're the real ball breakers, to put it bluntly. We go into aged care facilities and we talk about sex, but we talk about sexuality. So in our role, so Meridian basically is the former AIDS Action Council of the ACT. Excuse my voice, a bit husky. We rebranded in 2020. As we know, Australia had one of the best outcomes with HIV. So to keep getting funded, we know what funding's like. We're not for profit. We have to keep reinventing ourselves. So rebranding in 2020 to become Meridian, we got that name. Meridian was the first gay community-owned nightclub in Canberra. So that's where we got our name from. And people who were involved in that nightclub are still working within Meridian, or volunteers, which is fabulous. And we talk about the difference between sex, gender and sexuality. So there's that'd be a whole nother topic to talk about. But we also talk about human experience and how nothing's really fluid. Sexuality can change for anyone throughout their lifetime. We often get calls from aged care facilities saying, oh my gosh, we've got Brian, he's a gay man, he's now being sexually attracted to Jeannie. We've got to keep reminding him he's gay. And so we do a lot of discussions around, no, you don't. It's about meeting someone where they're at and supporting them where they're at in this space right now and keeping them safe. We have done a lot of work with Touching Base. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of Touching Base. They're a great organisation in Australia that's run by started by the lovely sex worker Rachel Watton. And that's basically, she works with people with disabilities and fights for their sexual rights. And Touching Base has gone into aged care facilities, and we know that touching, and Gwenda touched on that and everyone else, that it's a human right. It's a human right to be touched. We crave intimacy. When people are in aged care facilities, their touch can usually turn into clinical touch. When's the last time they've been, had their hands stroked? Sex is a huge gamut of things, as Nathalie explained, from touching to penetrative sex to all sorts of stuff. So we really work on exploring that and demystifying this social concept that sex is between male and female, and no one over the age of 60 has sex because, as soon as ageism is huge in this country, where there's a lot of fear amongst older gay men or gay men because of the concepts of early onset dementia and how they're going to be cared for as they age and what their rights are. We put together a little, so working in the navigation space, it's really interesting. I work with folk to connect with aged care services and supports and into aged care facilities. And when I was part of the navigation trial back in 2020, and I was focused solely on people living with HIV, people identifying as LGBTQI+, and their loved ones to support them, and the fear out there of entering an aged care facility and being supported for who they truly are to live their best life is huge. So we've done a lot of work in that space, and we find aged care facilities, once we have that talk, a lot of them say, oh, yes, we're all inclusive, we have same-sex people running our facilities, but none of their advertising is inclusive. None of the language they use is inclusive. We've been able to bring in, when we talk about sex, the one way we've learnt to actually educate people is to have fun. If people are having fun, they're learning, and they're learning through fun. So we actually took drag queens into aged care facilities and we created info bingo. So we were learning about sex and we were learning about sexuality and gender by having drag queens talk about facilitating info bingo. And it's fabulous. I mean, in the 80s in Australia, it was so homophobic that every drag show in Queensland was completely booked out. We're a strange race. So we're always advocating, always looking for opportunities to explore sex. We leave our condoms everywhere. We do talks at seniors weeks and seniors days about STIs, safe sex, keeping yourself safe, about the different types of sex and intimacy and how important it is to advocate for your human rights. We did have a funny story where Kyla actually presented at an aged care forum or a seniors day. We handed out lots of condoms and we had little bottles of hand sanitizer, and luckily during the break we overheard some ladies talking about how great it was to have these little bottles of lube. So it was quickly calling everyone back in to discuss, no, it's hand sanitizer, please don't use this on your bits and pieces. But what we've found out, there is so much, once you start to talk, there is so much interest and so much call to have those open, honest discussions. When is the last time, and you might have been the same partner for 40 years and that partner's passed away, when is the last time someone's had a conversation with you about safe sex? When's the last time you went on a date? When's the last time you explored sex? So we really push for those conversations. And listening to Theresa and Gwenda, you know, it's all about working within a trauma-informed, person-centred framework. And it's very tokenistic in this country, and we've got to get better at it, and we've got to get better understanding and more training in that area, because each and every one of us has our own journey, our own experiences, and we want to be treated as individuals. And I love the concept of the care directive, the sex directive. I think we should explore that more, because we want to go in, we want to be looked after, we want to be supported to live our true authentic selves. And I think that's so important. I'm going to put a link. We actually got a grant from the seniors and veterans a couple of years ago. And what we found when we were navigating folk who identified they were terrified. I mean, a lot of our aged care facilities are run by faith-based organisations, and a lot of those organisations do fantastic work. But it's that if you grew up in the 80s and or in the 40s, through the Vietnam War, anything like that, you've got that lived experience of mass homophobia coming out. So we did a lot of work in that space. We developed a little film called Silver Stars. And the beautiful folk and I'll put it in the chat, the beautiful folk that we worked with, by the time we'd finished working with them, they were just so open and had come into their own selves. And so they actually appear on this little film. And it's just about their experience of ageing and how they'd like to be looked after and how important it is to be your true self. And I think, we touched on, some of the speakers touched on that, we have social constructions in our world that you've got to be, your gender is your innate sense of self. Your sexuality is fluid. It's however and whoever you want to explore that with. And it changes through our lives. And I think it's really important that we've got to get rid of those binary concepts in our world. And it's all across the world, all through nature, all through human experience. And I like to look at it as instead of having a silver disco ball, we've got a beautiful multicoloured disco ball that represents everyone living their true selves. I mean, look at us all. We're all beautiful, unique human beings on the outside. Why aren't we unique and awesome human beings with however we explore our sex and sexuality and how we live our lives? So thank you everyone for our discussion, because it's just been absolutely amazing to hear everyone talk.
Thank you, Sharon. I loved hearing from you and the work Meridian does. It's just Canberra, Meridian, isn't it? It doesn't go into other states.
Well, it's a bit sort of politically
New South Wales a little bit.
So with the role I do, so what we do, being part of the navigation trial, and we were really able to feed back that people who identify, you know, you don't need to come at as LGBTIQA+, and I can explore that little acronym a bit more if you want to. You're living your life as comfortably as you are wherever you are. You know, you might have lived, and we know there's stories, you know, they've gone on for years where women have lived together, everyone's just assumed they've been best friends forever, and they've lived a wonderful life being partners and just slipping up, just being themselves with no drama. So as you age, you've got to come back into, you need support and go into a facility, suddenly you're exposed. So what we did was that we have, with our navigation trial, we've extended it through New South Wales, and we support everyone, regardless of who you are and how you identify. And we're really able to bring that trauma-informed person-centred practice into play, and we're doing a lot of work basically teaching organisations and services, because we can work with a person, and when we connect them with an organisation service, they can actually get dropped, because if there's no understanding of that real trauma-informed person-centred practice, looking at that individual for who they are and putting things in place, we've lost all that hard work. But what we've noticed by extending it to all communities, we work remotely from the Upper Lachlan all the way down to the Victorian border. We have so many people who identify, express how wonderful it is that they don't have to connect with a specified or organisation, not outed in their communities. They can just come and talk to us, and they're not outed at all. So that's fabulous. And we are working on trying to get funding to do some of our programs outside of the ACT, but predominantly and mostly in the ACT. So we have a sex worker outreach program that's peer run, and that is a fantastic program. We have an STI clinic. We have Jabulicious, which is when you come and get your vaccines. We have training and education. We have a sexologist that works with us, so we're always doing lots of campaigns. Of course, we've got the peer HIV support. So predominantly ACT kind of bleeds out a little bit. We can sort of blur the lines when we can. We've got wellbeing support as well. So it's just all about the funding. But at the moment, our navigation services are cover a broad area of New South Wales, the southern New South Wales PHN area, but predominantly most of our stuff is done in the ACT.
Thank you, Sharon. I put a link to Meridian there as well, and there's some great little side chats going on. Lucky I've got ADHD and I can multitask, because there's some people requesting research and Nathalie's linking with them. So this is exactly what we want to see out of discussions like this. Let's get this open to the floor. I can't see any questions that have popped up so far. We might start with some questions and then scroll back for comments. Aaron, do you see any in the chat group that you want to bring up? Or I was
just going to give a quick summary to lead into it, if that's all right. So just from the chat and moderating the chat today, there was probably 4 core pieces that I just think that we could explore. So advanced sexual care directives, consent, just consent in general. There's a lot of questions around, or a lot of statements around that. Family having input into the consent process, and how to educate and support workers in the industry. I just wanted to read one quick comment from Liz Mahone. I had a situation in an independent living environment where an elderly gentleman with dementia formed a relationship with a lady who also had dementia. We held a stakeholder meeting with the families to discuss how they wanted to move forward and ensure dignity and safety for both parties. At the end of the meeting, the families were the ones that decided that this was not a healthy relationship. Just a very interesting chapter.
And we've all seen that. If you've run a nursing home, if you've been a nurse in aged care, that comment, we've all done it. We've all gone and moved people apart from each other because that relative is coming to visit, until we've all said, calm down, we're not going to be reactive, we're going to have to do some education. It's not their time to shine, it's the parents' time to shine. That whole thing about asking children about sexuality is absolutely creepy. I don't think The problem is when you go into an aged care home, you need someone to give the permission for the children to stand down because they're hyper reactive and they've been put into a situation where they've got increased cortisol. They're under a lot of stress and they're trying to make, with good intent, decisions around their parents. You need to tell them this is their journey, not yours. Thanks for dropping them off. But that I'm going to deal directly with the older person. And I don't think people in aged care have the confidence yet as leaders to have those conversations from the minute they get to that admission interview, which is what I used to do. You don't get to pick your loved one wearing a yellow jumper on a Tuesday. You don't get to tell me who they make love to. Or you have to set the tone, and the tone's not being set. But yeah, that is the number one most common situation. So let's open up to the floor. We have Nathalie with your hand up. Did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. About that case or that was discussed, it's everything has to do with sexual consent. This whole story has to do with sexual consent, and apparently, I've been there. You get all kinds of people together, and we all decide what we think they are allowed to do. But what the step that we forget is, are these people do they have the ability to consent? Because it sounds like in this case that just because they have dementia, other people can decide what's going to happen and not the people themselves. They already have decided sort of that they want to be together and what they want to do. And I would say, unless there is some indication that somebody is uncomfortable or somehow behavior changes or something is going on, I don't see any harm in letting a relationship continue as it is. And maybe it changes. Maybe they just, I don't know, move on, or maybe it becomes more intense. And of course, then you will need to discuss again or decide again, like, okay, is everybody still comfortable? Do we think they are okay? Are they happy? Are they able to consent to that certain behavior that they're doing? Because we usually comprise it into like everything. They are able to consent or they are not able to consent. And it's an individual decision. We cannot say because they have dementia, they are unable to consent. So we definitely and I agree, we first need to have that discussion before you include family. And then you can, as a care organization, you can say, well, we decided, we are aware of this situation. We decided that it's all okay. They're both happy. It's all going in harmony. They both want it. And so that's it. We're going to leave it as is. And because it's your job as a care organization to make sure that people are comfortable, that they're happy, that they're living the best life as best as they can, with considering the situation that they're in.
Who had their hand up next? Aaron, were you? You're much more in. Yep, Gwenda, great. You're all over it. Thank you.
I'm just really concerned that enduring their powers of attorney or enduring guardian think they have the right to say, no, you have to move my parent to another area. They can't have a relationship. Their partner's just died or their partner's still alive outside. No, you can't do it. I have real concerns about that, and I have raised that with the department around the nominee and supported decision maker, because are we actually giving them powers to override our basic human rights? And that then becomes, in the new Act, where is the delineation going to be drawn? Because I'm going to pick on Mormons because I can, because some of my family are Mormons. But because Mormons don't drink coffee and hot drinks, does that give that person then the right to say, I can't have hot drinks in residential care? Because that's what often happens. They put their beliefs onto us. We have to fight this one, and we have to talk, as we talk to all our local members, all our politicians, we have to raise it. We have to really put this on the agenda, because as more and more supported decision makers, nominees are becoming legal, and we're looking at a federal government approach to director nominees, not the current state-based. We have to ensure we get it right, and we have to ensure that federally every state is hearing the same message. Just while I've quickly got the floor, I just wanted to raise in the question of work health and safety, because we do have a legal responsibility to protect workforce. But it's going too far now, expecting home care package recipients to have a police check before they get a worker in. To expect it, it's just going too far. Are you also going to get a police check before you let me into your residential aged care community? Yeah, we've got to talk about these things, and then we can relate them back to sex, because it's our right. It's my right if I do want to drink coffee or I don't. Don't drink coffee, never had a cup of coffee in my life, don't offer me coffee. By God, will I have a male or will I have a female? Well, I'll take either. But remember, we talk about sexuality, but we talk about gender. Gender's who you are, sex is what you do, and we both have a right to choose what it is. And I think we've really got to get it into the political sphere and start talking about it at a higher level.
Thank you, Gwenda. I'm mindful of time, so I'll just try and keep the next comments short. Theresa and Sharon, I believe you chucked your hand up at the same time, so I might just go with Theresa first.
Thank you, guys. I'll keep this quick. Very broadly speaking, a stakeholder meeting is the most insulting thing that I think I've heard of in a while. I've forgotten about those, and that is a frank and egregious breach of my human rights, certainly under the CRPD in relation to family and community. Don't do it, guys. I want to be a stakeholder. How about that? I make room for this advanced social directive, advanced sexual directive. What Gwenda's speaking about is in terms of the coffee situation and the hot drinks. If you've lived all your life for putting your will above your preference and abstaining from certain drinks, if it is your will that you'd like to be supported to continue in that way because that's how you feel spiritually safe, we need a pathway for that. Just as we need a pathway for someone who's been in a dreadful relationship for 40 years and their only escape is residential aged care, to be able to make space for freedom. It goes both ways, whether you want your will to take preference or whether you want your preference to take preference, or a blend of the two, depending on the situation. So that's what I'm really came here today to advocate for, is to think deeply about this will and preference and how the tension fluctuates for the individual, and think of your organizational structures and try to find ways to make room for us to be a stakeholder into the future, to record what's material to us. For some people, sexuality will be material, for others it won't. I'm just asking you to think about how we can implement that into our systems and structures, because the older people that are coming into your service are not the older people that have been in your service. We're quite a different cohort, different needs, different traumas, and we need to move with the times, guys.
Thanks, Theresa. Sharon, and then I think we had Vicky.
So yes, one of the things for me, talking about supported decision making, is we really push for the legal recognition of families of choice, because a lot of people have been fractured from their families, and your families of choice are those people that give you that love and support that a biological family would. And your family, when it comes to the crunch and it's your next of kin, they may not be the people that have your best interest at heart. So really pushing for that legal recognition of families of choice. And talking, I just wanted to add on to what Gwenda was saying about police checks. We already have aged care facilities asking for police checks when we're trying to support folk to access an aged care facility. So it's quite frightening. We did check that out with Seniors' Rights, and it says that, yes, they're able to do that. So it's going a little bit, from what the pendulum swung from one end to the other, unfortunately. But it'd be interesting to watch this space in this new supported home program and what that all looks like.
Thanks, Sharon. Vicky has disappeared off my screen.
I'll come back. Here I am.
Hello.
I just wanted to share very quickly, as a spouse with my husband in care, I've actually encountered a situation where another resident became totally obsessed with him, and I mean obsessed, hunted him down from morning till night. And, it appeared that he was compliant. I was actually away on a house sit for 6 weeks, so out of sight, out of mind. And when I came back, the staff were calling them the lovebirds, and they were very complicit in what was going on. And so I observed, because I'm very open to that. I realised, we were in a care environment, there's other people, and often I'd go in there and Michael would be holding hands with other older residents and things, and I certainly don't have any objection to that sort of behaviour. So I had to observe for myself to just see what was going on and was this consensual or not. And I think it was a very interesting observation. So I would sit in the back and watch them and be listening to the conversation. And it was clear that the woman, and she's married with 3 children. Mike and I don't have children in common, and he's an only child. But it was clear to me that she was very... a woman on a mission, organising him, like she was saying, I've got the car organised and they're coming to pick us up and we're going here, there and everywhere. It was, a very interesting situation. But I realised that Michael was actually, he was now not engaging with other residents. He wasn't engaging in the activities that he was normally doing during the day. And certainly in my mind, it was not a healthy relationship and actually became a behaviour management issue, to the point where she would tell me that I had to leave her husband alone and she actually physically attacked me. Well, I think there's a point where that's just no longer okay. Yeah. So I just want to put out there that there is another side to the story, and I think it would be good to hear some actual true case studies of situations that you might find yourself in, because I can honestly say I wasn't ever prepared for this on the journey with dementia, and I would have liked more support from staff. Instead, I had to broker that situation and actually bring them to the table to say this is actually not as it appears to be.
Thank you, Vicky. Very, very good, thought-provoking point as well. We've got a moment now. Did we have any other questions from the floor? Oh, Naomi?
Yeah, I just wanted to say Cindy Jones has a publication out that's quite old, Sexuality and Intimacy in Dementia, but it does have a section on page 23 thereabouts with what you've just described, Vicky, in ill and well-being signs. So when consent is in question, you can actually observe people. If they're not really consenting, there'll be signs of ill-being, which are, what you've talked about, withdrawal and changes in facial expression, changes in interaction, changes in eating. And when they are consenting and it's in question, there are signs of well-being. So they're smiling and they're actively engaging, and other parts of their life and their social life aren't affected. So I think when I've worked as a consultant, I've always talked with staff about looking at those ill and well-being signs when you are doing a behaviour chart or anything like that, so that you can identify, is that person showing signs of well-being or are they showing signs of ill-being? And then that helps you sort of form a decision about what could be going on and who's consenting to the actions and who's not.
I think that's so important, Naomi and Vicky, to have your real life experience, explaining that it's not always like, oh, this is so sweet, this couple's getting together and you think you're doing the right thing. We do a lot of things when we think we're doing the right thing in our nursing and non-nursing career, just to really read between the lines. We're not very good at getting the basics right. Can I just say that in aged care? So it would be great to even graduate to that kind of deeper thinking. But if you could share that link to that, I was trying to have a quick search, but I missed the last name. Naomi, that would be great. And having real case studies on a website. Is this normal? Is this right? When I just did a quick search on dementia and sexuality, all I got was sex is something that people do. It was like baby talk. Sex is normal. You know, how can you promote, you know, sexuality by giving them private areas? It was not this kind of conversation. We need to have these kind of conversations, not this watered down version of, you know, sex is natural and normal and when should we tell people to leave the room or not masturbate. I mean, that's just the basics, right? So loving this talk, everything about it, to be honest. But Monique, yes? You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, trying to get my finger on the button. And I think it's important too that we extend this conversation into community as well. And that's with families. We had a situation with my family, with my dad, where he thought that my daughter, when she was looking after him at 16, that she was a prostitute and she was by herself with him. Thankfully, he wasn't interested. That was our saving grace. But I've subsequently spoken to other families who've had similar happen as well. So I think that education needs to go broader. Because similarly to Vicky, in a situation she never ever thought she would come across, that was the last thing that never even came to my mind. So I think it's, we need to broaden that conversation.
Well, I think we need to have a part 2 because I think we only just scratched the surface of what we can talk about. So I'd love to see you in 2025 for another deep dive, and we can keep going with this, but we might have to wrap up. It's time to go to our jobs and our lives and our hobbies. So I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us and being brave and speaking about some really interesting and sometimes tough things to unpack and explore. I'd like to thank Theresa and Gwenda and Nathalie and Sharon for agreeing to give us their time today and all of the people that have attended. Our last and final Open the Doors is coming up. And then we're going to have a 6-week break so we can all breathe and plan for 2025. But it will be Dr. Nigel Payne, who is the most fascinating human. He specialises in learning organisational culture and change leadership. He'll be talking about his latest publication, The Great Reset. Leadership is so undervalued in aged care. You will find him a breadth of knowledge that is going to be put in your calendars today as I reset that topic, and it's 10th of December at 9 a.m. And we will look forward to hosting him and having you all there for the final OTD 2030 of the year. So thank you once again for coming. And all of this will be in a newsletter. We'll do a special edition newsletter with recording, all the links. And if there isn't an advanced sexual directive, we might write one. So watch this space because I don't know if it exists, but I'm happy to give it a crack and share it with the rest of the group because that has really stood out to me today and we can all use it in our own practices. So thank you once again and have the best rest of week. Bye.
Thanks, Theresa and Nathalie and Vicky. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Gwenda.